Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning to all of you. I think today is our webinar, ILAM webinar number 2, which is we're going to talk about landscape architectural approach for outbreak prevention. I think before we start the webinar, I think let's start with the umur kitab Al-Fatihah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. I think for today's webinar, I think we're going to discuss about landscape architectural approaches for outbreak preventions. I think there's another path issues that we're going to discuss today. And then looking towards this current outbreak, which is coronavirus 19, COVID-19, which is happened throughout the world. So ILAM take opportunity, it's not opportunity, but take this point of view to discuss with the rest of the panel regarding from the landscape architecture point of view. But when we talk about this outbreak prevention, so I think there are so many other things that we're going to discuss throughout this webinar. And then with us today, which is we have 5 specialists with 5 expertise to talk about their knowledge and to share about their knowledge and experience towards in the landscape architectural context and from the outbreak prevention context. So we have 5 panel, which is the first panel, which is Dr. Tengku Rinaldi Putra from University Putra, Malaysia. And then his background, which is in wildlife conservation, zoonosis, and ecosystem health. And then the second one, which we have Dr. Christine Fletcher, and ecologies, and then biodiversity conservation and management, ecology and zoology. So as an ecologist, we need her expertise to share with us. And then next we have Mr. Julian Hodgson Walker, a very senior landscape architect, very experienced landscape architect from Walrus Design. So as a landscape architect, I believe that Julian have vast experience designing the landscape and then how to integrate with the nature and so on and so forth. We're going to talk about that later. And then we have also Dr. Zainul Mukrim Harudin from International Islamic University, a senior lecturer, which is going to talk about urban biodiversity, landscape ecology, and sustainable environment. And then we have also a representative from National Landscape Department or Jabatan Landscape Negara, Puan Irda Zulfa is named, a very senior officer. And then Puan Irda, which is the person going to talk about guideline policies that Jabatan Landscape do have in this particular topics, which is more towards conservation and so on. Okay, so let me talk about the elaborate about the topics a bit, which is the topic given by ILAM, which is landscape architectural approach for outbreak preventions. I think how to correlate in the context of landscape architecture and outbreak prevention. So it's a very big question, and then that question is very interesting to discuss today. So when recently I read an online paper which is by Martin Clapper, which is on 8th of April 2020. So he did mention that nature facts related coronavirus. So in his presentation, he mentioned that 60% of all infectious diseases in humans are zoonotic. So it's very huge impact to us, which is 60% of all infectious diseases in humans are zoonotic. And then when she presented in her paper, in the paper, so those related zoonotics epidemic, which is related to nature, which is the importance of how we're going to conserve and make sure that the nature is in a good condition. So I think it's very new to me as well, because of to correlate between epidemic spread and loss of biodiversity and ecosystems. Very interesting. So I would like to invite Dr. Tengku Rinaldi Putra to give an overview about what is zoonosis and how it relates to human and nature. So that could be our first important opinions to be discussed today. Dr. Tengku?
Assalamualaikum and good morning to the respected moderator, fellow panelists, and also to all participants. I'm Rinalfi from the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, University of Putra, Malaysia. Thank you for having me here for this online sharing session.
Sure.
I'm here to specifically discuss the correlation between epidemic spread and loss of biodiversity and ecosystem. I'm specifically looking into the spread of infectious disease. Yeah. The moderator had said earlier, more than 60% of human infectious disease are caused by pathogens shared with wild or domestic animals.
Sure.
The term that is being used currently is zoonosis, which means a disease that is transmissible between human and animals, and animals to human, usually from animals to human. Zoonotic disease organisms include those that are endemic in human populations. Some of them have been around for quite some time. For example, AIDS, hepatitis, and flu. Or enzootic, which means that it's in the animals, and sometimes it goes out from the animals, sometimes it stays there. In animal population with frequent cross-species transmission to people, such as malaria and dengue. Some of these diseases have only emerged recently. For example, like Ramzi said earlier, SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. Emerging zoonoses are a growing threat to global health and have caused hundreds of billions of dollars of economic damage for the past 20 years. What we fail to realize that most of these outbreaks occur in a sporadic manner in different regions of the world, sometimes often not reported in the mass media. Such pathogens include leptospirosis, toxoplasmosis, anthrax, brucellosis, Chagas disease, SARS, Ebola, and also the original emergence of HIV. This creates a massive burden of human livelihoods, amounting to about 1 billion cases as reported by the International Livestock Research Institute in 2012. Yeah. It is caused by endemic zoonoses that are persistent regional health problems around the world. So most of the time, we sort of like nonchalantly ignore this, but sometimes when something big happens, such as the COVID-19, then we suddenly realize that it's a very important thing. So, of course, when we're discussing it from the landscape perspective, most of these outbreaks are due to anthropogenic practices, such as changes in land use and extractive industry, such as mining, logging, oil drilling, as well as animal production systems, farming, and captive fisheries. Those are all factors compounding to zoonotic disease transmission. Transmission of pathogens into human populations from other species is a natural product of our relationship with animals and the environment. This is a key, because if we fail to realize that the concept of One Health, which means that the health of animals and the health of humans is intertwined. So we will not be able to solve issues of outbreaks. So the emergence of zoonoses, both recent and also historical, can be considered as a logical consequence to pathogen ecology and evolution, which means that if we look at this from the point of ecology, I'm sure Dr. Christine will elaborate later. It's like if we look at the pathogens as prey, as predators, we are the prey, which means that any changes in the balance of ecology or ecosystem will create some form of outbreaks. Okay, the underlying causes that create or provide access to this new niche, which means new niche means us, seems to be mediated by human action in most cases and include changes in land use and also human induced activities. In the modern world, I'm going to take a few more minutes. In the modern world, risks are not limited to low-income countries. Okay, global trade and travel expands. Zoonoses are increasingly posing health concerns for the global medical community. Ecological, evolutionary, social, economic, and epidemiological mechanisms affecting zoonosis persistence and emergence are not well understood. So we're still working, taking steps towards going towards that. Okay, yeah. There are organizations out there that are looking into what pathogens are there in wildlife, such as Predict and EcoHealth Alliance. Such information could inform evidence-based policies, practices, and targeted zoonotic disease surveillance, and also prevention and control efforts. in ending my presentation in the earlier part, okay,
Yep.
in the past few decades, accelerating global changes linked to expanding global population have led to emergence of striking newly described zoonoses, such as COVID-19.
Yep.
Some of these zoonoses have become established, such as HIV. It's already a human pathogen. It does not go back into the animals anymore. It's like one outbreak and then it stays there and it decreases every year. But some were contained by rapid global response to its emergence, of which what we're trying to do now with COVID-19, with the lockdown and also the social distancing measures. Some we actually quite successful in holding down, such as Ebola and Nipah, where we actually, for example, Nipah virus, which occurred in Malaysia in around 1999, where about 100 people died. We managed to suppress the outbreak until there's no more Nipah cases in Malaysia. But Nipah arises in other areas such as Bangladesh. Emergence of zoonosis depends on several factors that often act simultaneously to change pathogen dynamics. So pathogen dynamics is very important because pathogens also behave as much as we behave. So the capacity of a pathogen to transmit or spread into a population is commonly quantified by the basic reproduction number, or R0. So in addition to inherent properties of pathogens, factors affecting emergence of spread include environmental factors, such as changes in land use, population growth, human behavior, social structure, and international travel. So the dynamics of zoonotic disease transmission are deeply embedded. We don't really know what the next outbreak is going to be because we're still not out from this current one. Directly transmitted zoonosis can also have several reservoir hosts, potentially serving different roles in pathogen dynamics, such as amplification and transmission to human beings. So when in wrapping up my first round of presentation, environmental changes, especially anthropogenic effects, affect the abundance of wildlife in reservoir hosts, which then increase transmission within the reservoir and increase the risk of zoonotic transmission, which then will create outbreaks.
Sure.
Back to the
Thank you, Doctor. I think it's very interesting point of view, and then very detailed explanation about what is zoonosis and how it relates with human and nature. Then happen to be zoonotic, which is epidemic, and so on and so forth. I would like to move to Dr. Christine. I think we listened to a bit of definition about what is zoonosis and what happened and so on and so forth by Dr. Tengku Putra. So, Dr. Christine, can you elaborate more when Dr. Tengku talked about animals, wildlife, and so on? You are the ecologist, so can you elaborate on the zoology and ecology of wildlife issues or problems? Dr. Christine.
Sorry, hi. All right, thank you for the question. But I think before I proceed, I just wanted to be a big thank you to Dr. Ramzi and to ILAM for inviting me to talk in this discussion. I would say this is only probably my 5th engagement speaking to a group of probably non-zoologists and non-ecologists. And I think that is great because a lot of the time zoologists and ecologists, wildlife conservationists speak among ourselves and we talk about the problems of the world. But you know, when we don't get this message out to people who are actually dealing with land use changes or dealing with redesigning our world, that element of wildlife conservation gets drowned or it just gets lost in translation. So I just want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. It's a really good forum for us to discuss about wildlife. And now we're talking about this conflict. We're talking about COVID-19 as a pandemic. That is considered as a human-wildlife conflict. Pretty similar to, like, you know, very often you see elephants crossing highways. That's a wildlife and human conflict. Or, you know, you're finding snakes in your bathrooms. That's a wildlife conflict. So why are these conflicts happening? So I'm not, you know, I've spent maybe about 15, 17 years of my career in a forest setting. And what I would like to share with you, I mean, it's not very scientific, but this is my observations from the kind of work that I do. For like 15, 17 years in the forest, I'm going to share with you 2 points that I've discovered. Number one, in the forest setting, in a natural setting, everything has a place and there is a place for everything. All right, so keep that in mind, because when we study landscape ecology, tree species have their own niche within a forest. Animals have their own distribution, their own habitat within a forest area. Everyone, well, I like to refer to animals and plants as everyone, as very humanoid, but everything has a place and they all work very well within their own niches. But what happens is when we alter that habitat, the natural order of things then changes. Suddenly, not everything has a place, and there's not a place for everything. So when things disrupt, things get displaced, this is when you start seeing, like I said, elephants crossing roads, snakes in your bathrooms, or maybe you're even seeing, bats in your living rooms. Things that are not natural, that are not usual for us. And you would consider this as a conflict, or people will consider this as a conflict because it is an inconvenience to people. But in fact, it's just a way of wildlife adapting to changes. Now, natural, or you would say Mother Nature, plants and animals, they are very resilient. They adapt. Things change, they adapt. When it changes again, they adapt. That's the whole evolution. That's how they survive. It's always survival of the fittest. So in a lot of these cases, when we come in contact with animals, when we have disrupted their natural order, we consider that as an inconvenience to us. But in fact, it's actually these animals and plants adapting to a newer world. So here the question is, are we adapting towards them? Are we adapting towards living with them in this new world order that we had created? So those are the kind of lessons I would have learned. It's not very scientific, being a researcher and all, but that is the kind of lessons that I have learned through my experience, and it's something that I would like to share with people not from the wildlife background, because whatever you do, there is a consequence. But are you willing to live with that consequence, and do you know how to address that consequence, to mitigate that consequence? Of course, there's no way for us to go back to the natural order again. So how do we adapt? Like now we keep on saying the new norm. Yeah, I think everyone's getting a bit tired of this word, new norm. What does this new normal mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, similarly here. So on the second point, when I talk about inconvenience, so actually for my undergrad all the way to my PhD, I studied bats. All right, and why I studied bats is because, well, I mean, there's just so much uniqueness in this animal, and there's so little that is known about this animal. And yes, if you talk about zoonotic diseases, I think you would know also like COVID and even like SARS-1 was very closely related to bats and the diseases. I mean, it was the reservoirs of viruses. And so I studied this animal, and I felt like, okay, there's just so many beautiful things about bats. And I used to share this with people so that they would be less afraid of bats. They always think of bats as very demonic animals, but they have so many important roles in ecology. Now, I followed bats from what they eat to where they live to having babies, and I keep on telling you, if you love eating durians, you would have to conserve bats because they are your main pollinators for durians. Okay, so I would give this kind of talk to the general public, and sometimes the talk can go on for 3 hours. There's just so much to talk about bats, and I've done this maybe a few times every year with a different group of people. And I can tell you, after every session, after 3 whole hours talking about bats and why they're so important to us, in every session, towards the end, there will always be the same question. There will always be one question that will be asked by someone in the audience. And that question is, doctor, thank you for that talk. It was very interesting, but please tell me, I've got some bats in my house. How do I get rid of them? It's quite ironic. You just spent 3 whole hours telling how good bats are. They're doing a service for you. But the end question is, how do I get rid of them? I want to see them. I'm happy seeing them there. I'm happy knowing that they're creating us a service, but I don't want them near me. I don't want them to live with me. Then that's when conflict happens. And I'm very, very sure animals don't want to live with us as much as we want to live with them either. So it comes to that point again. Animals are adapting to their new world order. How are we interacting with that? There's always a place for everything, and for everything, there is a place. How good are we in managing that? And I think this is where people like you guys, the landscape, comes in. So I'll pass that over to you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Christine. I think it's very good elaboration about zoology and ecology. I think the very interesting keyword that I can capture from the presentation just now, from the sharing knowledge just now, which is altering the habitats, land use changes, plants and animals, adopting plants and animals. They're recently talking about how we're going to live with types of animals that are close to us and so on and so forth. I think, Julian, when we listened to Dr. Christine and Dr. Tengku just now, there are so many, so many things that we can do in our profession, which is landscape architects. I think back to school last time, we do learn about ecology, which is landscape ecology, for example. But today, whatever things that presented by Dr. Christine just now is beyond things that we should do and know about this ecology and zoology itself. And then again, is one famous book that we always refer, which is Design with Nature by Ian McHugh. So that book elaborates more towards nature-centric rather than human-centric. So as a landscape architect, so what do you think about our knowledge at the moment, and how we're going to make it more understands, like what Dr. Christine mentioned just now? We are designer, we are landscape architect, we deal with nature, we deal with animals and so on, we design for them. But we have enough knowledge to do that design, or we still not have enough knowledge, for example? So can you elaborate on this, talking about our capability as a landscape architects to deal with zoology and nature and wildlife design and so on? Julian?
Okay, thank you very much for having me. I apologize in advance if anything I say is controversial. And a little bit like Christine, I mean, most of my comments will be anecdotal from observations. I'm not a scientist. I don't have a doctorate, so really it's speaking from experience. But I think as landscape architects, we're in a very important position. We don't just deal with the natural environment, we deal with the built environment, we deal with planners. We're the interface between planners, architects, engineers, local authorities. And I think it's important that we arm ourselves with knowledge of all these various issues, ecological, zoological. We can't know everything, but we have to have a broad understanding of the basic principles of the system, so that when we get involved in projects, we're in a position where we can guide the process, because we are probably best positioned to do that. But at the moment, we're probably not best equipped in terms of our knowledge base. So I think it's very important that we understand all those issues. Obviously, if you're a designer and you're more geared towards urban design, you're going to deal with more built form issues. If you're more geared towards natural design, park design, you may go the other way, where it's more towards nature. I mean, as a practice, we've done numerous projects, both urban and working with nature, and we've designed quite a number of parks, and our philosophy has always been to try and give those parks, give that land back to nature, whether that's a wetland rehabilitation project or whether it's just a new park. We will try and introduce indigenous forest species to try and encourage more wildlife to come back, with the intention that we increase biodiversity wherever possible. And that's not always, it's not always compatible with how people live. A bit like Christine was saying, you know, bats are really good, but people don't want them in their house. Likewise, biodiversity is great, but people don't want it too near to their house. There's a bit of a not in my backyard NIMBY attitude that is out there. So I think as designers, we have to be mindful of that. So there'll be areas where we can have increased biodiversity, and there'll be areas where it may not be appropriate just for practical purposes. So that's some of the things that we need to be slightly mindful and aware of. And in terms of if we want to steer the process and we want to increase biodiversity, get more wildlife back into projects, reduce the amount of habitat destruction and increase habitats so that we can get wildlife back in, then we need to understand those processes. We need to be in a position where we can guide clients and we can guide other professionals to help us achieve those goals. One of the reasons why we have all these conflicts is mainly because of habitat loss. I mean, basically animals aren't in their natural habitat, so they're going to try and coexist with us. That's not their problem. That's actually our problem. We've created it. And it's quite interesting seeing how the pandemic's affected different places in the world where there's been a lockdown. There's some areas in South America where you've had jaguars roaming around cities. You've had bears wandering around cities. Wildlife comes back very quickly when we're not there. Yeah. So we're the main reason that it's lost its habitat, and we're the main reason why it's being constrained into smaller and smaller environments. So if we can try and contain and reverse that process, we will potentially help ourselves in doing so. So, like I say, it's really about our power to influence planning processes, strategic development at a local and national level. And in order to do that, we have to be armed with education, and we have to be armed with the various knowledge elements that we need, which we probably don't fully have at the moment.
Okay, good. Interesting. Yes. Yeah, I think very interesting from Julian. I think as as a landscape architect, we should go back to that basic understanding of the questions and how we can influence the, for example, opportunity and so on. So thank you, Julian. Yeah. So Dr. Zainul, I think so far we listened to very interesting discussions talking about ecology, zoology, zoonosis, and in context of landscape architecture, the knowledge and so on. So Julian did mention about one of the things that we can do, which is through education. So at school, at university, we talk about sustainability, we talk about sustainable environment and so on. So how do you look upon these understandings, the sustainable environments, and how it become important for us to focus in the context of education and so on? Dr. Zainul.
Hi, good morning, Dr. Ramzi and other colleagues. So regarding to the sustainable development, I think sustainable development is the needs of present without compromising the ability of future generations. Okay, there are many definition or description on the sustainable development, right? Maybe from United Nations also has the Sustainable Development Goals, and we all also have a lot of protocol, for example, starting since Rio de Janeiro, we have Montreal, we have Kyoto, and many more. And what I want to share my view related to the sustainable development, there are many also in Islamic approach. The view on the environment, how do we conserve or how do we adapt or attract with the environment. For example, I want to share one hadith, one small hadith. Let me share the slide.
Zainul?
Yeah. I'm sharing the document. Okay, so we can refer many verses or hadith related to Islamic view, but I want to bring just one hadith which is related to my personal view also. Okay.
I cannot see that.
For example, from Anas, reported that Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says that if a Muslim plants a tree or sows seeds, and then the bird or person or animals eat from it, it is regarded as a charity or gift or sadaqah. So in this hadith, we can conclude that the environmental behavior or attitude toward the environment. For example, in the human dimension, we have a values, we have attitude, we have knowledge and behavior. The most important thing is the knowledge, which is can influence the value, attitude, and behavior. For example, when we plant a tree or we sow a seed, the other meaning also is a conservation or preservation. And the other meaning also we plant or we care our environment, right? And also when we provide this, for example, like Julian says, it's about habitat, the reduction of habitat destruction or habitat loss. So when we plant or sow seeds, we actually create a habitat, right? For example, like Dr. Tengku says, the outbreak and the health of the human and health of the wildlife. So we have to take care of the health of the wildlife, and we have to take care of the health of the human. So by planting more tree or conserve more habitat or places, for example, like Dr. Christine says that natural is every home have a place. So this is the hadith related to the places. We have to, as a designers of landscape architect, we teach our students in many subjects related to environment to take care of the environment, to design and see natural functional on their ecosystem itself. Okay, so then the design can implement together. So that is the important key hadith. There are many hadiths. For example, like Prof. Zaini Ujang have write books about 40 hadiths related to Islamic perspective on the environment. But today I just share one, and this hadith is actually close to me, close heart to me, right? So on my study is actually on the birds. Okay, how biodiversity or urban biodiversity relate to the interrelated with the humans, right?
Sure. Yeah. We can go to next question later on about the birds as indicator, Dr. Zain.
Yeah. So maybe just a little bit. The study is relation about animals, especially birds, in order to take care as an indicator for the environment. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Social with us, very important understanding about that one. Puan Ida, I think from Jabatan Landscape Negara, I think the authority which oversee the overall landscape development in the country. I think so. Coming back to this pandemic, COVID-19, for example. So I think Dr. Christine highlighted about the importance of wildlife habitat and so on, conservation, preservation. Julian informed us the importance of strategic planning and so on. So how Jabatan Landscape Negara look upon these views, which is could be from policies, guidelines. Can you share with us, Puan Ida?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator, Dr. Ramzi. Hi, everyone.
Yep.
Assalamualaikum and a very good morning to our audience. Okay, thank you for tuning to our session today. I'm Ida from the National Landscape Department. As an introduction, allow me to share briefly about the National Landscape Policy that we already have since year 2011. So the National Landscape Policy, I will call it NLP in short, is a guide to steer the national landscape development comprised of strategic policies and action plans as the catalyst for the national landscape policy. So for all of us, for your information, there are 7 trusts of the national landscape policy, but regarding to today's session, there are 2 trusts that of the NLP that are most likely relatable. Okay, I will share slides for this. Okay, as I said earlier, so this is the Trust 3 and Trust 4 of the National Landscape Policy that I've mentioned. So basically, Trust 3 consists of trust strategies and action plans that aims for landscape development improvement and applying landscape approach in urban development in the country, such as green infrastructure. It also covers action plans in the planning, design, development, maintenance, and also legal aspect of landscape areas, okay? So under Trust 3, we have action plans. So we can always refer further to this NLP for information, okay? And we also have Trust 4, which is to protect natural landscape as national treasure. So Trust 4 aims to increase activities of preservation and conservation of biodiversity and natural landscape for the purpose of research and public recreation. Also, the action for enhancements of biodiversity by using indigenous plants as instance. Okay, so what I'm trying to say here is that we already covered about the importance of maintaining and increasing, enhancing about biodiversity in relation to landscape architecture in the NLP. For me, for us, the biodiversity and the natural setting is very important that the country has its own national policy on biological diversity. Okay, in this perspective of landscape architect, I can say that this EID is not something new. We had it previously, but then we, after a long time, we started to, we think less about the about this EID, and we focus on the other public health aspect, okay, in designing or planning urban areas. Okay, so but basically, I think by restoring degraded natural habitats will help to re-establish the nature composition and dynamics of the wildlife communities. One study suggested that areas with low biodiversity is more likely to be affected with EID because nature as its balanced situation. So can we say that the higher the biodiversity means that is a higher chance, the higher the resistance. Okay, so from what we have done so far, I think we can take example by creating botanic gardens in the country and arboretum as well, is as a reserve biodiversity itself and play a great role in biodiversity conservation before, during, and post-pandemic. We always design parks and urban areas based on users' need. I think after this, we should also design in response to the nature's need.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, thank you, Puan Ilda. I think yeah, alhamdulillah, we just finished the first round of our session, which is talking about the importance of and understanding about this pandemic or preventions, outbreak preventions, from the understanding of zoonosis, zoology, ecology, landscape architect's point of view, and education point of view. Then just now we talked about one Edda talked about from authority point of view. So the national landscape policies, which is have 7 clusters, which is it available to the public then upon Edda?
Yes, it is. You can always go to our website and have a copy of it. It's in PDF, in BM, and English.
Yeah, it's good. Thank you. I think that's very interesting, which is we have policies, so we need to encourage our young and future landscape architects to look at that policies and translate it in the context of planning and design. So yes, we can proceed to. I can see this is the second round of our webinar, which is I would like to go back to Dr. Tengku Rinalfi, which is just now we listened to policies which is by Jabatan Landscape Negara, National Landscape Department. So my question, which is why the importance of to establish wildlife conservations for the human health, because of we need your opinions toward this type of information. Dr. Tengku.
Thank you for the question. Okay. This is due to the One Health concept. When we're talking about reservoir of pathogens, they're always available in wildlife.
Yeah.
They're always there. Since the evolution started, pathogens need hosts. So hosts comes in multiple guise and multiple forms. So usually they are in wildlife because it's in that undiscovered yet in humans. Okay, those that are endemic to humans, we've already developed vaccines. We've already developed medicine for it. We've already developed a lot. Okay, so when we're talking about why conservation is important to reduce outbreaks or to control outbreaks, it is because when the animals are healthy, regardless of whether it's wildlife or livestock, they are harboring the pathogens inside them. Okay, so they are the reservoir. If you think about the river, it is being contained by a dam. So this wildlife population is actually holding a lot of dangerous pathogens inside them that if it escapes or in the event of spillover is an event where the disease is transmitted between wildlife into livestock or straight into humans. Okay, so if a spillover happens, then we'll have an outbreak. So good conservation would include good wildlife health management. And wildlife health management is not straightforward. We are talking about an animal that cannot be in contact with us, and some of the animals are downright dangerous, such as tigers or large primates. So we are talking about how to manage their health remotely. Okay, so the best way for us to manage wildlife health remotely is by preserving or conserving their ecosystem, because like Dr. Christine has said earlier, if there is a place for everything, that means everything will take care of itself. So it does not need active management from us. It's basically the medicine for wildlife health is protecting their habitat. I would like to refer to what Puan Ilda said earlier regarding EID, or emerging infectious diseases. Emerging infectious diseases occur because there are changes in the ecosystem and also the ecology. Okay, when we're talking about spillover events where pathogens are transmitted between wildlife into livestock or into human or into livestock then into human, we are talking about an episode where the pathogens have no more hosts, or they have less hosts inside the wildlife, that it needs, there is a necessity for them in their nature to go and infect a more vulnerable being, which is us. So humans are quite, how to say, naive in dealing with our body. Our physiology is quite naive in dealing with some pathogens. So, for example, COVID-19 creates, I think historically, this is one of the, in modern times, this is one of the biggest impactful event to all of us, especially to the medical community, whereas where they are faced with a barrage of patients and humans or people displaying symptoms that are irreversible. So, going back to the host.
Yeah, I think very interesting, which is to relate with what national landscape policies come out, which is very interesting. But the one that you mentioned just now, which is wildlife health and management, right? Dr. Tengku. So do we have in our country that one?
Yes. In the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, we have a postgraduate program. It's called Exotic and Wild Animal Medicine or Wildlife Health. So we do have.
Link, yeah, this is very interesting suggestion, which is we could link with national landscape policy from IRDA, which is talking about to adopt this type of understandings toward wildlife and so on and so forth. So this is another good, very interesting guideline that Jabatan Landscape can develop later on.
Yes, I think it's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
And since we are actually in working on the reviewing of the policy, because it has been more than 10 years. So yes, why not? With this epidemic, with this new situation, we might call for a new approach and a holistic discussion and reconnect back between public health and also urban design. And this is, for me, I think this is the opportunity for interdisciplinary professionals to get together right from the planning stage to designing, development and maintenance. Okay, because we believe that designers play an essential role in the prevention and control and response to many of these diseases. Landscape architecture, we work with the outdoor space. So it is an interesting field actually, because it combines social, environment, economic. So it is for all actually. So I think it is a good suggestion, and I look at it.
That could be a new norm policies for Jabatan Landscape.
Yes.
All right, I think So Dr. Christine, listening to Dr. Tengku Rinafi just now, and then you did mention your PhD, which is in talking about bats, which is flower, or which is talking about as indicator for biodiversity conservation. And then I read a paper which is interesting quote, which is high biodiversity can buffer against disease transmission. So can you elaborate more on this particular question?
Right. I was more prepared to answer about what are the biodiversity indicators we use. That was the kind of earlier question that you posed to me. But when we speak about, again, I am not a medical researcher. I do understand about bats, and I do know that they are a reservoir for over 200 viruses, and it's the same case for a lot of the wildlife in our forest. And there's so much more that we don't know that they are harboring inside. So it's not so much about, when the higher the biodiversity, the greater the buffer is, or as Ida was mentioning, that, they're more resilient and it protects us from all these zoonotic diseases. It's really, for me personally, I think it's very much a social and it's a social issue, really, our behavior, how we expose ourselves towards them. Because again, as nature has intended it, these animals have lived with these viruses for years. And for so long, nothing has happened. It has not jumped from animal to animal or animal to human. But why now? Obviously, it's been a change of our behavior, a change of how we manage things. And as you mentioned, there's policies out there, there's guidelines out there to tell you how to manage it well so that everything is contained. But it's when it is breached, that's when it disrupts the order, again, as I was mentioning. So yeah, just because you have high biodiversity, also just to make a point, it doesn't mean that, it's a very good thing. I give you an idea about island effects. So if you were to have a landscape management part and you start building or you start establishing a landscape or urban park, and you start getting a lot of animals coming in, biodiversity. But number one, look at it, is this the kind of animals that you want living amongst you, having close contact with humans? Then you have to think about, quite a number of the diseases before this were actually also transmitted from monkeys. And we're talking about macaques. We're always in constant contact with macaques, feeding them ice cream. That's not a good thing. And that's how this transmission happens. Again, it's a human behavior. We are the ones who are actually promoting it, encouraging it. But also, again, high biodiversity of what? What kind of biodiversity are you looking at? We don't want to be looking at high diversity of exotic species, for example. So it's very easy to know whether an urban park is meeting its objectives of creating a good atmosphere or a good habitat for animals.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. You look at I would say, if you go to a park and it's very quiet, you got lots of nice trees, but if it's very quiet, you don't hear insects, you don't hear birds, it's a sterile environment. That's your indicator. All right. Similarly, when you go to a forest and it's very quiet, something is wrong. So those are the kind of telltale signs. But eventually, it's again our human intervention. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Christine. Yeah. Thank you. Julian, yeah, when we talk about new norm, so we listen to ecologists, we listen to expert talking about subject of zoonosis and so on. What is your opinions talking about plan and design our landscape in the new norm, for example? Julian, yeah.
I think it starts, you have to look broader scale to start with, not wanting to depress people. But people talk about sustainability, but we are now beyond sustainability. I think the reality is that the human species has exceeded the ecological carrying capacity of the planet to hold it. So, and everything results from that. There's overpopulation, close proximity of species, all these cross-contamination issues. I think a lot of it stems from that. So no matter what we do at a broader global scale, it's always going to be a mitigation. And mitigation is by its nature reactive. So we're just going to be reacting to different scenarios, whether that's the results of climate change or whatever. So from a bigger perspective, yes, we can make a difference, but it's going to be, I think, in a localized, whether that's national or geographical level, but it will be a reactive mitigation. So in terms of what we're trying to do is, in how we approach projects, and Christine's right, biodiversity isn't just, it's balanced ecosystems. It's trying to get a complete, as far as you can, ecosystem there. So you've got wildlife, you've got birds, you've got insects, you've got all the plants that sustain it as a self-contained environment. It's not easy because that will return to nature if it's left to its own devices. But to try and implement that and manage that, you're always going to have a slightly imperfect system. But at least it helps. And in terms of pandemics, I mean, we're just talking about COVID-19, for example, but there's all sorts of other pandemics that affect other species that affect us and are products of what we do. So you've got a situation, for example, where our main pollinators, bees, the global population of bees is dying. And that's really serious because without pollination, plants can't propagate. Without plants, we can't eat. All of our base protein comes from plants, whether that's through meat, which actually gets its protein from plants, all the way up. So, you have to kind of understand all these issues. So from how we plan as a landscape architect, there's like I said earlier, it's understanding the issues so that we can start to affect policy in a much broader, proactive way to ensure that we have environments. They won't be sustainable. Nothing we do is truly sustainable, but we have environments that can exist in some state of equilibrium that is non-destructive. And I think if we can achieve that, then we'll be going in the right direction. And that won't be easy. It takes a lot of willpower, and there's a lot of issues involved and a lot of barriers and challenges to overcome. But I think that's the only way we're going to deal with it.
Okay, Julian, thank you. There's one paper talking about the importance of native vegetations to increase biodiversity. So what is your opinion about that?
I think indigenous native vegetation is really important. It is by virtue of the nature of a place. So it's tied into that ecosystem. It's tied into that ecology of a proximity. So it's very important. And it can return. I mean, we did a project in Sungai Buloh, and it's actually been, I think we implemented it in 1995, and we used indigenous tree species in our woodland blocks. And it was actually it was a 9-hole golf course within the residential development, and we used indigenous tree species with nurse species, and it's been very successful. And FRIM have recently been engaged by the client to go and tag every single tree. So every single tree in that development is now tagged. It's on GPS. And what they found was that there were certain species there which are actually endangered. They've identified Hopia subulata, which is the Hopia canching, and that's endemic to the Canching Forest Reserve. And somehow that's found its way into this development, which we're quite happy about. Now, whether that was planted and the people in the nursery didn't know what they were propagating when they grew it, or whether it's come through natural means by birds or whatever, we're not sure, but it's there and it's returned, and that's great. But you can only achieve that when you set the groundwork and you put the basic palette and the basic platform there to enable those systems to regenerate. And going back to what Christine said, in that same development, I mean, there's a lot of noise at night. We have cicadas in all the trees. We've actually got canopy shyness on some dry balanops in certain parts of that development as well. So, it's been very successful, and we're quite proud of it. In fact, I think they've even had hornbills roosting in some of the trees at some point. So, it's that getting a whole balance, a whole system. You get the right vegetation to attract the right insects, to attract the birds, other wildlife starts to come back, and then you can get a full system. So when I talk about biodiversity, that's what we're trying to promote. And the same within the wetland projects that we do. We're trying to create a proper aquaculture where the environment for the wetland species is not just one species. It's mixed. It's mimicking nature as closely as possible. And then we get as much of nature in terms of biodiversity and number of species back into those developments. And that's how we can help. And if that helps on a local level, that's fantastic. And that's what we should be moving towards.
Yeah, thank you. So, Dr. Zaino, I think as an academician, so we listen to Julian's experience in his office to talk about planning and designs in context of the new norm. So again, I would like you to elaborate more in the context of how do you look upon human and nature relationship in the context of sustainable environment? Dr. Zaino.
Yeah, Dr. Ramzi. So, human relationship with the wildlife. Okay. So, there are less study on this, especially among the built environment professional. Okay. But recently, they are increasing um, interest on this topic, right? So there is a lot of theories of environmental behavior, okay, or environmental attitude. Basically, it's divided to two. One is pro-environmental, and number two is non-pro-environmental. Okay, so so this study shows that there are various opinion of people related to environment. Okay, how do they value the environment? How their attitude to the environment, and how do their behavior towards environment. All of this, the important keyword is the knowledge. So we have to educate the youngsters, people outside, publics and all, and increase their knowledge towards environment. By increasing the knowledge, they can value things and more initiative to be a pro-environmental people. For example, like doing recycling, planting seeds or whatever environmental activities. Because I think from the school or childhood, we have to promote this knowledge. For example, if you look the books in the primary school, when talk about wildlife, people in Malaysia we talk about megafauna or big gigantic wildlife. They know rhinoceros, they know whales, they know tigers, they know lion, but they don't know the local biodiversity or local wildlife. For example, like the question that you asked to Julian about the native plants, right? So maybe people aware about native plants. We know about pokok penduduk, we know about kedondong, whatever. But when you ask people on my survey and on their knowledge towards wildlife, especially local wildlife, they don't know. They don't know what is kingfisher. They don't know what is black oriole bird, huh? Dendang kunyit, for example. They don't know magpies, or they don't know burung murai. They don't know burung murai, okay? Or they don't know green pigeon, for example, green pigeon, right? This birds, for example, animals is an indicator. If you have a red list or endangered species in your urban area, that means it indicates that your urban area is very high biodiversity. For example, like our sister Erda says that higher biodiversity is higher resistance. Okay, so that's why they are looking forward on botanical garden, more parks, for example, neighborhood park, larger park like state park, and also, for example, like Kiara, Bukit Kiara, right? So this park actually is a reservoir or place, a habitat for this animal. So the knowledge is the key word. If our youngsters do not know the local wildlife, the name, they cannot recognize it, I think we can forget about the values, we can forget about the attitude, and we also can forget about the behavior. And there is no new norms. Okay, you don't know what animals in your place. How can you react to your environment? You don't know the local bugs, the name of the bat, the name of the bugs, the name of the fish. In MCO, for example, when the guys go to the market, they don't know which kembung, which which ikan patin, which one is tilapia. We don't know. Or we to buy ketumbar, they know where which one is ketumbar, where is soap, down soap. They don't know, right? So that
you means that education is very important, right, Dr. Zainal?
Education and knowledge about things, environment, about plants, animals, and everything about science. So that is important.
I would like you to elaborate on that subject in the next round, inshallah.
All right.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right. Okay. I think Pon Irda. I think very interesting. We listened to Dr. Tengku, which is talking about wildlife management, sort of wildlife management plans, and then Dr. Christine's mentioning about indicators, wildlife as indicator for biodiversity, for example. And then Julian informing us about the importance of planning and design in the new norms. And then Dr. Zainal just now mentioning about these educations or even knowledge. So at these at the Jabatan Landscape departments, just now you mentioned about national landscape policies. So when you plan something, for example, like parks, then you did mention botanical gardens, botanical parks, and so on. So how are we going to make sure this is really impacts to human well-being, for example? Can you elaborate on this, Ponita?
Okay. Parks actually there are benefits of health and also well-being. So health, something that got to do with medication. So, but well-being, mean in our language is kesejahteraan. It's all about the state of mind. Okay, how you become less stressed after being a while in the nature, those biophilic effect and so on. So by having botanic gardens and parks, actually it is very good, because parks and botanic gardens serve different functions. So botanic gardens got more to do with research. It has research role. It should have botanists, the horticulturists, and so on, for the maintenance and for the management of the park itself. Okay, but it still give recreational purpose to the users. Okay, and what are we going to do with the wildlife in the park? Okay, we still I think like Dr. Christine said, we want them, but we also like to get rid of them. So I think it's how we behave. It is, I think, and the adaptation. I mean, how we accept the situation. Okay. Yes.
Interesting. I think to expand what Julian, I posed the question to Julian about native vegetations. So at the Jabatan Landscape Negara, so how are you going to deal with introducing or reintroduce those native vegetation, because of they are the one who can create high biodiversity, for example. So what do you think about that, Vanessa?
Okay, I think I've read about this biodiversity thing. Is the biodiversity is more complex, then actually the maintenance will go less. Okay, you will have less maintenance if you use native species in your parks rather than you use introduced species. Okay, so that is the thing that we can apply. Okay.
Is it can be as your new policy that you're going to draft?
It is not. I think in our policy it is stated, and without having that also, we actually, when we have new projects, we ask the consultants, okay, or our in-house projects. We have already started to use the concept of that in the design. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Pranita. I think very interesting so far. Alhamdulillah, I think yes, we come to the last round, which is for our session, which is I would like to come back to Dr. Tengku Rinafi, which is just now you mentioned about wildlife health management. So can you elaborate on that? Can you elaborate details on that particular opinion, Dr. Tengku?
Okay, sure. When we're talking about wildlife health, most of the work, I'm talking in specific relation with what we're doing here in UPM. When we're talking about wildlife health, most of our sampling are done on captive wildlife. So we have numerous students, postgraduate students looking into getting their masters and PhD, mostly veterinarians, looking at health or disease aspects in wildlife. However, we are also running courses. Hello, can you hear me? Yep, I can't hear you. Okay. However, we are also looking at wildlife health in terms of herd health, or means free roaming wildlife. So those are being sampled sometimes, and we just look for signs of pathogens that are available in wildlife that is within the vicinity of human settlements, just to see whether there are risks of spillovers from wildlife into humans. As an example, we did a short study on bats within the campus of UPM. I think Dr. Christine will be, if she's here, she will probably strangle me after this. But we found that just from histological study on the tissues of the bats that we caught within the campus of UPM, we found there are signs of rabies in some of the bats that we look into. But having said that, this does not mean that we are trying to promote eradication or removal of bats from within the campus. No, we are trying to look for ways to mitigate this. I would like to use the word that Julian was using just now, mitigation. So the way to mitigate this is to provide a buffer area, or to provide a corridor, or to provide any sort of landscape management that is available, that will be available for the wildlife, specifically bats, to roost or to linger around, but not to be in contact with humans. We are quite lucky here in this side of the world, specifically in Malaysia, because most of our bats are fruit bats. So there's no vampirus bats over here. so I say lucky because the chances for these bats to be in direct contact with humans is very almost zero, because they don't like us, like what Dr. Christine said, and we don't like them. So but there is always a risk there. Okay, there's a big but there. We can talk about virus shedding. Virus shedding means that the virus is still available in the indices or from the biological samples that the bats leave around, for example, feces or saliva or anything that's being left around for humans to be infected with. But having said that, again, chances are it's very low for us to be able to get this, and there's no case from of rabies from wildlife in this side of the world yet. Unlike in other parts of the world, like the States or in South America, where bats are known to be in contact with humans. But before I end this, I would like to emphasize, I think from my personal point of view is that from the landscape perspective, what I, as a user, I would like for people in landscape management or landscape management to be looking into ways to mitigate human-wildlife conflict from creating a biome or a space for the wildlife to be able to live harmoniously without us actually having in close contact with them. I've trained for like the past 5 years. I've been training. There's a training I run. It's called Training in Prevention of Wildlife Zoonosis. We train postgraduates and undergraduate students on the risks of disease transmission from animals into humans, specifically wildlife. And we've already established that there is a gap that needs to be established. So this gap for wildlife, I have a t-shirt for it, it says gap for wildlife. So a gap for wildlife means a gap that is made specifically for the wildlife to live away from us. That's one. And also for us to be physically designing a gap so that there's a clear boundary between the wildlife and also human. Sometimes not physical, but just from the perspective of disease transmission, there's a gap. So I'll give it back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Tengku. Okay, I think I would like to invite Dr. Christine. Dr. Tengku just now mentioned about wildlife health management. So I think you have experience in talking about wildlife management plans and how to create environmental friendly development plans. Can you share with us, Dr. Christine?
Thanks. So whenever I get the opportunity to provide input on how we can better manage wildlife within a landscape or to design a landscape that is more wildlife friendly or environmental friendly, I look into two principles. The first one is about connectivity. You might have pockets of beautiful landscaped environments, parks, and even residential area with lots of greeneries. But if they remain in pockets and they're not connected somehow to even a bigger landscape area or a bigger forest area, that is when you see animals being contained or confined within these pockets. And that's when this kind of interactions with humans happen. Yeah, because they have nowhere else to go. And that is when that's when the reservoirs of viruses starts evolving within that community of animals. So number one is to remove these barriers and to create connectivity. Yeah, and I think when you look at a larger landscape, that is how it should be. I would see, when you talk about urban biodiversity, when you talk about urban parks, it should be within a larger landscape where it's like stepping stones for wildlife to be moving, to be freely moving without restrictions. It's when you put barriers, that is when conflicts happen. Yeah. And then the other second thing that you should also look at, this connectivity actually helps you to improve your biodiversity flow. So as Puan Irda was saying, if you have more native species, if you let nature take over, and as Julian was saying, if you let nature take over, it's just gonna regenerate and populate very quickly. So you have less of a management issue that you need to handle. Allow nature to take its course, but first you need to remove the barriers so that you can create a larger landscape. And that will also help you to reduce incidences of conflicts with wildlife. So those are the kind of like principles I would always try to infuse whenever I get an opportunity to help to build or develop some sort of a management or landscape planning. Yeah, that would be my take.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Christine. Julian, I think just now Dr. Christine mentioned about principles to have a good wildlife management plan, which is one of these, which is to create connectivity. So you can share from your experience. Just now you did mention about Sungai Buloh projects. What about can you further elaborate on that? To create the connectivity within in these ideas of
Sure.
wildlife management plan.
I think it's a really good point, and I think it's really important. Whenever we approach a planning from a landscape point of view challenge, and we've been involved in quite a number of townships, we try and look at it as what it connects to outside that township, but within the township, which is the area that we're directly responsible for, we look at connectivity of green spaces. So what we have a term, we call it the Green Continuum, And the idea is that if you were a squirrel or whatever, you could actually get throughout that whole development through the treetops, so everything's connected. So the parks are connected through green corridors to the streetscape is connected to other things, so that the wildlife can actually permeate through the development. Now, in saying that, it comes to my point earlier, you can't have biodiversity, wild biodiversity everywhere, because you have conflicts with people. So the way that we approach it is we have an intensity diagram. So the areas where we want people not really to go that often, which will be in the parks, and we'll try and designate certain areas within the parks, that will have a much higher intended biodiversity with less human interaction. Where you've got more human interaction in the residential compounds, or within other kind of toddlers' playgrounds near residential areas, you may want less biodiversity in the species that are associated with that, which some people would perceive as pests. So you have to plan with intensities of biodiversity, but you have to interconnect it so that it can move freely through that environment and it is not contained. And Dr. Christine is absolutely right with that. Yeah. The other aspect is education. It's really, really important. So some of the clients that we're working with are actively engaging in education programs within their townships, with signage in the parks, bulletins on their websites. So if you do encounter wildlife, you're not afraid of it. You know what to do. You can call the township management. They will come and help you. Education so that you understand how that wildlife fits within the broader environment, so that you can appreciate its value, so that you don't want to just get rid of it or kill it. So education is really important, making people aware, making people appreciate, making people understand the importance of the environment as a whole to us as human beings, of which we are an integral part. So all those things are part of design, and as landscape architects, whether it's at a kind of federal level, whether it's at a national level, we can affect the way that people think and the way that people go about designing and addressing those issues to get a better outcome. And it's great that the National Landscape Department, JLN's got these guidelines. It's just a matter of enforcing them and making sure they're followed through in a very practical and realistic way, because they have to be enforceable and adopted by everybody, both private and public sector. So, the private sector is the people predominantly that we deal with, and they are very, very receptive. I mean, over the last, I would say, 15 years, there's been a much greater appreciation of landscape, because clients have realized that lifestyle, as they put it, which is basically the outdoor environment, the living environment, is what people want to buy into. So that sells their product for them. So the better that is, the more integrated that is, the more successful their development is, the better sales they get, they're happy. So, we have to try and put a slightly, not a commercial edge on it, but we have to understand their needs as a client so that we can help them. But in helping them, we can help ourselves, and we can help wildlife. And we have another term, actually, because most of the developments that we get involved with are on disturbed land. So what we try and introduce are restitution landscapes, where we give that land and that aspect of what we design back to nature, and people live in coexistence with that, rather than it being dominated by people and nature has to work around it. So we try and work it the other way, particularly in the parks and the larger blocks of green open space that we're responsible for.
Yeah. Thank you, Julian. I think we are already 1 hour plus. So I think I would like to call Dr. Zaino for a very quick elaboration on the environmental attitude that you mentioned just now. So, Dr. Zaino?
Yeah, Dr. Ramzi. So I think I just want to wrap up. We have a lot of guidelines in Malaysia as well. For example, like we have a guideline for green neighborhoods, and some of the guidelines, like Julian says that the connections, the improving the more habitats creation, for example, right? So we also have another act, for example, like Act 172. We have a tree preservation orders, right? So I would like to suggest that maybe we can have also, for example, like wildlife or habitat preservation order, for example. Right?
Yeah.
For us to create a biophilia or ecological design approach, okay, where we can increase more habitat. For my research, I found that this is for Jabatan Naskah Negara. In our parks, we have less mixture of plants, for example. You can see if, for example, like birds, there are many categories of birds. Okay, for example, like frugitivores. Frugitivores eat fruits. Okay, so in our parks, maybe we have less this kind of plants. Okay, if you want to invite wildlife, you have to know their niche, and we also less of flowering plants. Okay, which birds like nectar birds is less found in the park. Okay, we can many parks that visit we are actually just found the for example like myna and sparrow.
I think I think it's another good suggestions by Dr. Zaino and Julian just now, which is talking about green corridors, educations, and so on. At the Department of Landscape, I think how do you look upon these ideas to have to revise your policies and so on and so forth? Juanita.
Yes, I think in this session we get like 2 or 3 suggestions that I think is very good, and we appreciate it very much. But and we may use it in our other policies and guidelines. Okay, but the core is actually the landscape architects and the designers out there. We should not wait only after policy and guidelines. What more important is that we have to have a little bit knowledge of ecology, of wildlife, of environment, for us to be designing or to plan with the holistic landscape approach in mind. Okay, start with ourselves first, embrace this new norm, embrace this and take this as opportunity for us to design a better outdoor spaces for our better environment and our better health.
Thank you, Dr. Panita. I think it's very interesting webinar. I think I'd like to thanks to all panels, Dr. Tengku Rinafi, Dr. Christine Fletcher, Mr. Julian Hodgson Walker, Dr. Zaino Mukrim, and Panita Isai. And then it's very, very fruitful knowledge that you share with me, myself as well. It's very interesting from what Dr. Tengku just now share about the understanding of zoonoses. Christine shared about zoology, ecology. Julian shared about the practice side of view, which is a landscape architects. And then Dr. Zaino and Ida from the policies. I think we can mention that this fruitful discussions. Another very good conclusion that we should practice, which is goes back to the education itself, and then we have to practice to apply it and to make sure that the biodiversities, ecologies properly conserved and preserved. This is not for us actually, this is for our future generations. So this is another very interesting. So last round, which is anyone to share something before we end the session for this webinar? Julian? Yes,
I'd just like to thank you for having me on this webinar. It's been very interesting.
Very interesting.
I've enjoyed it. So yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Julian. Christian?
If I may, I would like to share a quote from a very important and famous zoologist. He said, the proper use of science is not to conquer nature, but it's how to live in it. So I'd like to leave that quote with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Tengku Rinafi?
Nothing much. Thank you so much for inviting me, and remember, Gap for Wildlife.
Thank you. Farida?
Okay, thank you again for inviting me, and I'm very honored for this opportunity. And we look forward to have a good discussion among the people of the industry. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Guys, thank you very much to all of you. So I think Dr. Zainal maybe have problem with your handphone. I think thank you very much to all. So would like to inform as well to inshallah ILAM we have another webinar which is next week, which is talking about the ILAM webinar series number 3, reforming landscape architecture practice post pandemic, which is the moderator, which is landscape architect Siti Masyarah Saludin, and we have rock panelists, which is Miyako Takano from Takano Landscape Japan, landscape architect Hua Ching Eng, landscape architect Juwita Wan Hashim, landscape architect Alfred Lee Fei Chong, and Said Musli from Miami, USA. So that's for next ILAM webinar series. So again, to all panels, thank you very much. We might call you again for the future webinar and so on. So Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.